Hey everybody, Sayre at Nova again. And this week we got a couple of cool Hondas, sort of second generation superbikes I would call them. Starting off here, this is a 1982 CB750K. 82 is the last year of this run, although the 750C went into 83. But after that run, the what we call the Nighthawk, came with 16 valve motor, different motor came in. But this is sort of the end of the line for the beginning of the Honda 4. 69 was the first Honda 750. It was a single cam. We've talked about them before. The history of motorcycling knows about it. Revolutionary, turned the motorcycling world up on its head. Kickstarted the Superbike era, and was Honda's first real big bike. Just over 10 years later, we have this. Honda's, at this point was kicking butt. They were established. They had dominated and along with the other Japanese manufacturers. Harley was on its knees. The British bike industry was dead. So they were really king of the hill at this point. And still making a pretty kick-ass bike, but it was getting a little long in the tooth. And not long after this, a couple years after this, the Interceptors, the V4 liquid-cooled bikes came out. This bike was not sold as a superbike. The K was the touring model. The F was its sporting model. But if you look at them, the F is really, functionally a very similar bike. It's not what you would consider to be a sport bike, even by the standards of 1984, where the Interceptor was. So it was still very much the end of the first generation, where a superbike was just a motorcycle that could go really fast. This bike was in here for, we've had this a few times. This time around, we did some maintenance stuff, chain and sprockets. He had cracked intake boots on his carburetors, a couple other little maintenance valves, stuff like that. And then it wasn't running quite right. It wasn't charging the battery. We put a new regulator rectifier on it, and then it still was acting funny, and we ended up throwing a set of coils at it, and it runs beautifully. So kind of had to work our way through a bunch of things that we didn't necessarily expect. But it's not that uncommon on an old bike that if it hasn't had those things that, if the part's been on there for 40 plus years, it's soon going to need to be replaced at some point or another. You noticed the stickers on this bike. There's Grateful Dead on the front and Van Halen on the back. We were joking when we couldn't quite figure out what was wrong with it, that the stickers were causing interference with each other. Didn't quite align. So we figured all that out. But anyway, this bike, as cool as it was, is nowhere near as cool as that bike. Sorry, Kurt, love you, great bike, but this is, you can see, if you look close at the motors, very similar architecture, but a little bit different, a little bit bigger. Everything's a little bit larger, the motor's a little bit wider, and instead of a 4-cylinder bike, it's a 6-cylinder bike. So this is the Honda CBX 1000, 1047cc. Came out in 1979, just like the DOHC 750s did. And it's basically very similarly like a 750 with 2 more cylinders grafted on. Not quite the same. The stroke is different. The bores are remarkably similar, though. And weirdly, this bike was also designed by the guy who was in charge of the Japanese Honda HRC racing team in the 60s that came up with a 250cc 6-cylinder race bike. It's called the RC164 or RC165. Or the RC166 was the 305cc version of it. If you have time, look up that bike on the internet, try to listen to it. It's an amazing, crazy machine. My alma mater, Team Obsolete, has an RC164. I never got to see it run, but I held the whole conrod and piston assembly would fit in your hand and be about that big. So incredible engineering for their time. That bike would rev to 20,000 RPM. Amazing stuff. They also had a 125cc 5-cylinder bike, same concept, really tiny, high revving machines, put out far more power than they really had a right to do. So very much in line with what Honda was capable of. Honda has always loved to show off its technical prowess, doing things kind of the hard way. They resisted 2 strokes, for a long time, while Yamaha and Suzuki were building fast 2 strokes that were 2 cylinders or maybe 4 cylinders. That's what Honda was doing to keep up. They were putting 5- and 6-cylinder machines out there of tiny displacements. So, same guy that did those came up with this concept, and it was pretty cool. I can't say for certain, but it was definitely one of the faster production bikes of its time. I don't know if it was the fastest one in a straight line. It was never particularly a good sport bike. Again, same kind of era of the 750. The frame is just, still a standard frame kind of style, round tube, flexes too much for really aggressive cornering, and it's heavy. It's wide, but still, for the American market, which was almighty, it goes really fast in a straight line. It's smooth and it's oil tight, starts and runs pretty easily, and no kickstart or any of that nonsense. So it was pretty cool. Funnily enough, too, this was not the first six-cylinder production street bike. The Benelli Sayre came out in the early 70s. That was a six-cylinder 750. And the funny thing about that bike is it's a copy of the Honda 504. So Benelli took the Honda 504 and somehow, I don't know how they did this with the trademark. I don't know if Honda sold them the rights or if they just stole it. But if you look at a Benelli Quattro, it's a 500cc four-cylinder that looks exactly like a Honda 500cc four-cylinder, or the CB550 that came after that. And Benelli took that design and just stretched it and made it into a six-cylinder. So it was a single overhead cam like the Honda 500s and 550s. And then they also eventually stretched it into a 900. When this bike came out, they stretched it up to a 900. So also a cool bike. Benelli had that one first, but it, funnily enough, is a copy of a Honda. So there's this weird back and forth between Honda and Japan that happens a couple times over the history of stuff. And I think that's great. I think it's innovation. It goes both ways. No one country invented it. No one country stole it. Everybody just builds off what the other ones are doing and makes it kind of cool. So this bike in particular is here. The owner got it, and I do believe he wants to sell it. We're going to get it running for him and do some stuff. It's actually it's got 4,684 original miles on it. Has been largely untouched. It was last registered, I think, in the 90s, and that was briefly, and before that was last registered in the early 80s. So it really hasn't seen much use. And his goal here is for us to get it, go through the carbs, and Bailey is very excited to do that. We've had a couple of CBXs in here before, and they share a lot of the same parts with this generation of Honda, the DOHC Hondas. And she's very excited to get into it. Syncing a six-cylinder carb setup is not for the faint of heart, but if you're a qualified tech like Bailey and a passionate nut job like Bailey, it's a lot of fun, and it gets done pretty well. Other than that, the tank has a little bit of rust in it from sitting, so we're going to clean that out and reline it with our favorite tank liner, which we use sparingly. Not a huge fan of it, but when you need it, and sometimes it's the only thing that'll do. Other than that, we're not going to touch it too much. The tires are original. That kind of stuff goes really well for trying to resell an original bike. It's got the Comstar wheels on it of its time. Honda had these instead of cast wheels. We have riveted spokes, basically, that bolt to the hub and rivet to the outer part of the rim. They are interesting. They're lighter, definitely lighter than the steel wheels that were on the K model, for example. There were some reports of early versions of these coming loose, the rivets coming loose. I've never personally seen that, but I think if you start to race a bike like this or use it in anger, you may start to see stuff like that happen. But regardless, it's correct. It came with the bike, so that's how it is. So this bike is largely as it came off the showroom floor, barely used, and that's pretty cool. We talk sometimes about restoration versus originality, patina versus something being restored. I like things to be original. I like a little patina rather than something to look like it was brand new. But every so often you get something that actually is as it came off the showroom floor and it hasn't been restored. And that kind of stuff is, that's the gems of this market, and pretty cool. So if you're looking for one, reach out. Can connect you up with the owner. Yeah.
Cameraman question.
Yeah.
This engine looks tilted way more forward.
Yeah, it is. That's a good question. So Todd is asking about the tilt of the motor here. Both of these motors are tilted forward. This one is definitely tilted more so. The 750 is probably here, whereas this one is here. And that's done to kind of lower the center of gravity. You're getting, and also make space, but you're getting so much weight at this point. The top end of this head is no joke when you add these extra cylinders on it. So just moving it that much more forward, you're going to be less top heavy, less of a pendulum trying to tip over, and help with handling. These bikes did actually race. You can find footage of them racing at Isle of Man. I know somebody who races one in Arma, historic racing, and they sound great. If you look through our feed here, we have a short of one of these bikes from a different customer that has a Bassani pipe on, a 6-into-1 pipe. It sounds amazing. It just howls when you get on the pipe. These sound great, the stock ones, but when you get some of those, racing pipes on there, they just sound incredible. So they're pretty cool. But racing one would not be for the faint of heart. They're powerful, they're heavy, and they don't handle. So you gotta want it. But they're quick in a straight line. So yeah, any thoughts you guys have about CBXs or this era of superbike? I've said it before, I'll say it again. I love this early era of superbikes. I think this is a really cool time in engineering, really cool time for motorcycles in general. And you know, you could still get a bike that you could basically win a quarter-mile drag strip on and then ride it to the grocery store too, which is not what bikes are being built for these days. So let us know your thoughts. And as usual, thanks for watching. And if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe.